The first question is really designed for us to get to know Dr. Bacote better and why he's passionate about this. And so to start it off, where did you develop a passion for civic engagement, and why do you think it's important for Christians to be involved in public sphere?
Thanks. The passion for civic engagement did not arise because of typical reasons that you might think. As you see, if you read my book, you see on page 21, the reason that all of this happened is basically because of my love of rock music. Is actually how it all happened. Because I'm what you would call a culture-affirming Christian. And the problem with being a culture-affirming Christian, who, when I was you guys' age, was like listening to Iron Maiden and things like this, is that that was a minority position in my Bible study. Most people weren't feeling what I was feeling musically. And I had an intuition that as a Christian, you could affirm good things that came from the culture that weren't explicitly Christian. You could affirm good things that were out there, and that Christians ought to be willing to participate in what's out there. But it was only an intuition. So for me, it was real struggle, because I had a strong desire to live a life of fidelity to God, following Jesus as Lord of my life, that being the number one thing. And the question for me was, well, how do you do that when you also have this sort of cultural affirmation? So really, whether it's culture or it's politics, whatever it is, that was a bit of a crisis, because the only way that you could legitimately have a connection to those things, at least the circles that I was in, was by connecting those things explicitly to some kind of evangelistic opportunity. In other words, you're basically a reason for participating in politics or participating in, quote-unquote, secular music was so that you would provide some kind of avenue for witness. Now, let it not be said that I came up here tonight and said that nobody should do that. But my point would be that that's not the only thing that you should be able to do that. I mean, to me, it made sense that you could say something like, I like how they play music, that doesn't mean I want to be them. So I can affirm what's there without having to buy the whole thing for you. And the thing is that, so that was really the entryway into having to think about whether you can have a deeply robust, committed Christianity that isn't just about connecting to the public for evangelistic purposes, but that you're also engaged and you can be involved, whether that's musical appreciation or whether that's political involvement. And it wasn't until around my mid-20s where I really began to have the theological language for that. Because for me it was a crisis. Because the thing that was going on in my head was the warning of, are you caring too much about the world? And of course, there are warnings in the Bible, even James 4:4, you adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world is hatred towards God? Or 1 John 2:15-17, do not love the world, anything to love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. But it's that 1 John 2 text, I think, shows us actually the way out. Because when it describes what world is, it doesn't describe anything about the creation. What it describes is three dispositions that are really about distorted allegiances. So that if one's allegiance is to something other than God, and you're living in God's world with an allegiance to something other than God, then that's how you wind up being worldly, because you're living in God's world without reference to the God who made the world. So when it comes to any kind of public engagement, the problem isn't actually the fact of whether or not you're engaged. It's what your allegiance is as you're engaged. In other words, whose playbook, if you use an athletic metaphor, whose playbook are you going on? And so for me, discovering that was liberating. Discovering the work of my dissertation figure, Abraham Kuyper, was also liberating, because then I got the theological language for saying why it wasn't just an opportunity, but really it was a responsibility for us to be involved in the created order. So whether we're talking politics, whether we're talking educational policy, whether we're talking athletics, whether we're talking the arts, etc., all of those things are things that we ought to be doing because they're fundamental aspects of what God wanted humans to do in this world to begin with. So that's how I got there. But I didn't get there without going through crisis moments, that's for sure.
And I like, especially what you said about creation and us having to interact with God's world. And so, specifically, currently, there's been a lot of racial tensions and racial strife in God's world.
So, yes.
Specifically, I'm thinking of the death of Trayvon Martin, which launched us into this hashtag Black Lives Matter movement. In your opinion, do you think that Christians should engage this movement and the issues that it raises? And if so, how?
Well, so I think the first thing is when we talk about hashtag Black Lives Matter, right? Well, I mean, are you just talking about a slogan? Are you talking about an organization, etc.? Because for some people, it's just about a slogan. But it's not just a slogan, it's actually an actual organization, right? So I think the first thing is that we have to think about, well, what exactly are we talking about by being involved in it to begin with? Now, to the extent that it's associated with, I won't say new forms of activism, because it's not new what's being done, it's just different. There is certainly a different character or disposition in Black Lives Matter activism. So Black Lives Matter activism, for example, isn't interested in pursuing respectability. But here's the reason for not doing that. And it's a reason that I can understand. To talk about being respectable, or to talk about certain forms of being legitimate, is understood by Black Lives Matter activists as taking on a posture that when you take it on, it's kind of like taking on a posture of surrender, actually. Because to be respectable is to conform yourself to the way of a society that's constructed to already oppress minorities. So if that's what being respectable means, then why be an activist, right? Now there's also the fact that it's a form of activism where they don't want to just have the same old people being the leaders. So they want broader leadership. They want a broader range of issues because it's not just about race; it extends to sexuality as well, for example. And it's in tension with the forms of Christianity that were associated with this thing we'll call civil rights activism, right? Because it wasn't just one thing. There have been articles written that say that it's not, it's sort of anti-church. It's not really anti-church as much as it is wanting to be identified with a kind of liberationist Christianity, if it's going to be identified with liberationist Christianity. So to which I would say is that there's dimensions of liberationist Christianity that are okay to embrace, but that's actually just as reductive as saying Christianity that's just about certain forms of proclamation but doesn't orient anyone towards any kind of social change. So, in some ways it can just be you're just trading one form of limiting how you're thinking about the fullness of faith for another. So it's not like you have to choose between Jesus being someone that cared about people's material lives for also thinking about Jesus being someone that cares about your personal character as well, right? That's a false dichotomy. So you need both. Anyway, I kind of answered that for a long time, so I can say more, but. Would you like me to say? Yes. I'm just thinking about planning things out. So, I actually haven't said yes or no, have I? No, he hasn't. So what I would say is this: is that any form of activism, what you have to be aware, be wary of, no matter what your political persuasion is, is that it's going to have its limitations. And that no form of activism is going to deliver, the realized kingdom of God. Now, that doesn't mean, therefore, do nothing. Stick your head in the ground. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that you have to temper your expectations. Which doesn't mean, again, do nothing. It just means that if you're going to be involved, one, why am I being involved? What am I hoping for this to accomplish? Because, to me, this is a very important thing. A lot of the activism, at least what we've seen, what it does a good job of, perhaps, is pointing to certain realities. But, here's the thing, okay? Protests don't construct public policy. And public policies that we need if you're going to have certain things to change. Because you can protest all you want, but no policies getting made. You're just pointing to a reality, but you're not doing anything to attend to the structural realities that themselves have to be changed. So we need people who play that role of pointing out things. Look at what is there. But we also need people to say, okay, now that we see that there's a there, what do we do about the there that's there? What kind of policies do we put into practice?
And going off of what do we do with it there that's there. I think oftentimes we talk a lot about it, but we never really go into, well, what can we personally do?
Mm-hmm.
And so in your experience, what practical steps have Christians taken in response to the issues that you brought up, and what was good and what was bad?
Well, people do all kinds of things. What I would say is that in the same way that we see in Scripture language about there being a body with many members, the first thing we have to recognize is that everybody's not going to do the same thing. Because sometimes this happens whether you're talking about evangelism or whether you're talking about political action. People who are very good at focusing on their particular practice, or the thing that might be, is their, there are some people, you need to say to them, look, you need to be an activist, because it's just what you are. You breathe and there's activism. Okay? And then you be an activist, and somebody else needs to make policy. Somebody who says, not so much for hitting the street, but man, I think about all the little details. So we need all of these people. Because what sometimes happens is, some people who think everybody needs to be walking around protesting. Look, everybody's not going to do it. Okay? But some people need to. And some people, they're just going to. It's who they are. Right? So we need people doing all kinds of things. But one of the things that everybody needs to do is to have a long view. If your only view of things is what I call a crisis management, or politics is crisis management, then here's what politics is all about. I wait for something to happen, something to flare up, and then I want political life to address that. But political life is going on all the time, even when there doesn't seem to be anything flaring up, right? So we need to be involved in political life when it's kind of boring, as well as when it's a very fever pitch type of moment, right? So at least some people need to be involved in what I call the very unsexy work of politics, right? So this is like showing up, and people are passing budgets and all these kinds of things. Somebody's doing it. It's not invisible people. It's not gremlins that are doing it, okay? So somebody needs to do that. But somebody else also needs to be the people that are mouthpieces, or people that are drawing attention, etc. So we need all kinds of people. But there's also this thing to point out, which is that, especially speaking to an audience of college students, if you're in college, part of your job is to be in college. Here's what Cornel West said when he came to Wheaton. Somebody asked about, what about all the things I can do in the world, and they're very, very passionate about them. And he encouraged them to be passionate. But he said to them, he says, here's what you have to know about me when I was at Harvard. I was concerned about all of those things. But I spent a lot of time getting lost in the library. And the point is that, these 4 years being an undergrad, okay, you're never getting that back. It is the most unique experience. There's just nothing like it. Being in a 4-year residential type of situation like this, okay, this is not, grad school is not the same thing. Okay? Those 4 years, be a student. It doesn't mean don't care about things. But caring about those things shouldn't be the way you be a student. You need to be a student too. Right? So steward that, but pay attention to those things you're passionate about as well. But don't let that push you out of the way of being a student.
And in being a student and enacting change, I think in recent events we've seen how important the role of students on college campuses have been, especially in Yale and Mizzou. What unique role do you think us as Christ followers have in this campus context?
Well, I know change is happening in Missouri. I'm not sure change is happening at Yale. I would say there's attention to what happened at Yale, right? And then there's debate about free speech or what's the right kind of free speech, et cetera, right? So what I would say is college students who are Christians, once you've aside from being a student, I would say think about the places where, it sounds cliche, but it's true, but where your passions and where your concerns and where your gift meet big problems, right? But recognizing that, there are, innumerable big problems, right? So no one person is going to have some messianic, heroic action that solves all the problems, right? So don't put the pressure on yourself to be a Messiah. There's only one Messiah, right? So don't be a Messiah, but serve that Messiah by not ignoring his world. And recognizing that there are all kinds of difficulties there. And in some cases, the thing you do is just keep learning about it. In some cases, learn about ways that people are applying solutions of various kinds. So I think that's a big part of it. But I would also say that in contexts where there are like protests and there's a fever pitch type of thing, embody a disposition where people see that no matter what, you're committed to loving your neighbor as yourself. Whether it's the neighbor who's on your side of an issue or the person that you're saying, oh Lord, what I'd like to do right now is put my hand around their neck and slowly increase the pressure, is what I'd like to do right now. Let's be real. Am I like the only person who's ever had a moment like that? I'll bet I'm not. I'm not saying you're right to admit it, but So the point is this, is that we are called to love our neighbor as ourselves, but not to say who's our neighbor and who isn't. Your neighbor is any other human being, whether they agree with you or whether they don't agree with you. And the point is that in fever pitch moments, people who say, the one thing I will radically do is respect every human being, whether they're on my team or not. But that is what I will do. That's massively countercultural. But it's very Christian.
And in working for change, oftentimes there is a lot of frustration because you're working for this big societal change that oftentimes might not happen in your time, and it can become very hopeless and very hard. How can we look to the example of Jesus when it feels as though our efforts are not bearing fruit?
Well, I think one of the things to keep in mind is that certainly when we talk about looking to Jesus, in part we look at just his life. He came to his own received him not. In other words, hey, great triumphal entry. What a parade. Capped off with the crucifixion at the end of the week, right? Thankfully followed by resurrection. That's why we're here, all right? But the point is that even looking, past the resurrection, Pentecost, etc. Christians lived in the Roman Empire. Now, on the one hand, in Acts 1, Peter says to Jesus, "Are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel?" Bacote in translation, and not just mine. So now, is this when we win? It says when we get the power. Can we just march with palace now. I mean, because you overcame death. Surely you can overcome Caesar. And of course, Jesus says, sorry, I can't tell you when that's going to happen. Right? But then he says, but you will receive power when the Spirit comes upon you, right? And you'll be my witnesses. So the thing is, for being a witness isn't just a person who says, okay, I expect to be frustrated. But I think the person who stands between frustration and also feeling like it's their responsibility to bring in the king, right? You know, and they were like, there were some people like the zealots, but that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to be revolutionaries. So we need to stand between the frustration and a sense of feeling like I've got to be the one that makes everything happen. But we also need to think about this. We think historically, it reminds me of something that I saw Henry Louis Gates talk about. He was being interviewed by Tavis Smiley. He said in 1850, if you were a slave in the United States of America, what plausible reason did you have for believing that 15 years later, 13 years later, technically, there would be emancipation? What evidence was there? None. Guess what? 13 years later. Right? So the thing is that we don't know when change will happen. Right? So we have to focus on presence, faithfulness, fidelity, certainly hoping for change, praying for change, doing what we can to help, facilitate the levers moving, etc., but recognizing that sometimes the change that we want to happen happens. Other times the change we're not looking for happens a whole lot faster. Right? And in those moments, we still need to be people who say, okay, this is disappointing, but I'm not going to check out. Right? I mean, please stay active. And here's the other thing to think about about that dimension. No one should complain if they check out. Okay, because if you check out, other people are happy to check in. Right? And they'll just take things whatever way they want to do it. Right? So checking out really isn't an option that we should take.
Awesome. So that concludes our part of the interview, and we're just going to move into a time of open mic. And so if you have any type of question that you want answered, you can come down here. For those who would like to remain anonymous, we have this texting option. So it's very simple. You text TruthForm 209 to the number 2233, and then you will get a notification that you are part of this subscription. And pretty much what will happen is then you will be able to text it, and it will be anonymous. And then I have my sub-team leaders who will be filtering through it and sending me the questions. So if you see me on my phone, I'm not on my phone. I'm looking at the questions. So
I'm a nice person. You can just ask me.
that too. So feel free to come on down whenever you're ready. See.
I mean, can I just project it? The very last thing you said was interesting to me because you said like checking out isn't an option. Well, at first I was misunderstanding. I thought you were saying that checking out is like okay, but then you said checking out isn't an option that we should take. I think you said because other people will check in and then regret.
Yes, that's right.
Would you mind like elaborating on
Yes.
that? And I want to know like. First, what you meant by that, but then also, is that the only reason why we should check out, or is there anything else?
Well, okay, so what I meant by checking out, I meant that we should have a disposition for engagement in God's world in general. Right? That's particularly what I mean. But I also think that if you're concerned about problems, and let's say there's a group of people who are concerned about problems, but their approach to the problems is to just complain to each other. Especially if there are people who actually have agency that might play some role in what happened. In fact, just last week, I was at an event in Arizona, and there was a person who talked at the governor's office. And she talked about the fact how just a few letters about a particular issue made a difference for certain policy things that happen. I mean, one of the interesting things I think about our society is that it can be easy to have a kind of cynicism right now, or apathy, to a certain degree, about whether change happens. And I think in this regard, though I have my criticisms of this book, James Davison Hunter's book, To Change the World, one of the good parts of the book is that he talks about how change usually works. And it's usually a long, slow, like generational process, right? It doesn't happen instantaneously. So I think sometimes when we're thinking about change, we need to recognize that most of the time it's a long game, right? So which means that it's like the slow and steady, persistent involvement. And so that's what I mean by check-in. To the extent that it sounded like I was saying check out, what I mean is this. No one should make themselves and their involvement messianic. That's the thing that I'm concerned about. Because here's the interesting thing that can happen if you're involved in something, and let's say it gets people's attention, and some things change. Some little things change, right? The needle gets moved a little bit, right? There are temptations when that happens, right? One of the temptations is to start thinking about yourself in a certain kind of role. That doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to do that. But you need to be aware of those temptations, right? It's a common temptation for anything that anyone does well. You do something well, how do you do it in a way where you don't deny it, okay, because that's lying. Tell the truth, admit it. You can even feel good about it, feel great about it. But don't mistake success with becoming messianic. And some people, I think that they succumb to that temptation. I mean, it happens everywhere. It certainly happens in the church. I wish it didn't, but it does. So does that get you? Wait, I think you had a two-part question, or a three-part question. So I'll make sure I got everything you said.
So you talked about, okay, so you define like checking in versus checking out. But you said checking out is not an option, and I guess like I was just wondering about the reason for that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
The reason, and I'll say more about this tomorrow night, is because to be human is to be a participant in God's world. That's why. And I think what's happened, at least in evangelical Christianity in the United States, is you get the rise of before it became associated with a certain kind of social operation. You had what's called fundamentalism, which is about fundamental beliefs. Then fundamentalism became something that was not just about beliefs, but also about a social disposition, which had a withdrawal from society. And then you have over half a century of Bible-believing Christians being disengaged from the society. And then people get re-engaged in the 1970s. And because all of a sudden by 2008 or something, or 2015, things aren't happening as you hoped they would, people have buyer's remorse. As if there weren't other people involved in the 50 years you checked out. Right? They're driving the bus in another direction. Why are you surprised the bus is going in another direction? You weren't driving the bus. And now when you start driving, you think people just say, oh, you can have the steering wheel. Why are they going to give you the steering wheel? They kind of like having the steering wheel. So the point is that if you want things to change, it's the long game. And the other thing is that, we can't ever confuse any of our aspirations with being the thing that once we've done this, then the whole world will have shalom because of my public policy or because of my successes, right? I mean, we need to have, our hopes and things being set right in the end in God, but in the meantime, whatever aspirations we have, to recognize that there may be certain gains, but there's always going to be something else. There's always another problem.
What do you think it looks like to pursue racial reconciliation on a relational level?
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. The question was, what does it look like to pursue racial reconciliation on a relational level? And the simple answer is, it is the practice of strong commitment, massive patience, a massive commitment to dealing with misunderstanding, and becoming an expert at listening. What's that? Let's see. I'll try. So a commitment to being in a relationship, right? A commitment to massive patience and a commitment to listening. And handling misunderstandings, yes, because there's no escape. Because here's the thing about quote-unquote racial reconciliation, okay? It's like being committed to living in another country that you've never been to before. Now, if you go to a country you've never been to before, now just how long is it going to take you to be comfortable in another country? Now, let's say you went to, let's go with a language that's hard to learn. Finland. Oh, Turkey, okay, let's go with that one too. I was going with Finland because I know cognates with English, right? Finland, from what I understand, Hungarian and Finnish are very hard languages to learn because you have to just learn them flat out, right? So if you go there and you want to be one of them, or you really want to know them, okay, you got to be there for a while. And you got to do a lot of risk taking. And boy, you're going to make a lot of blunders as you try to become comfortable doing it. But here's the other thing, right? Is that people who are involved in it have to be, willing to deal with all this fumbling around and stumbling and misunderstanding and have essentially a kind of high tolerance for the fact that, man, people just do things that I didn't think they would do. But the thing is that they do those things, but they don't run off after they do them. They say, no, I'm really staying here with this. So you got to be long on patience, long on forgiveness. And also recognize that it's likely to be a relationship where someone may be doing more forgiving than the other person, at least for a while. And because sometimes the way it works out is people are like, look, why am I doing all the forgiving here? Right? Because sometimes that's just the way it works out. When you've had these imbalances of power and ways that's worked out relationally, etc. It's not an equitable thing that you're dealing with. So it can't work out equitably. It's not about being equitable. It's about having a relationship where people actually are committed to knowing each other. Okay? In fact, think about it this way. If you want to be married, we're married for 20 years to a lovely lady, and I'm still learning a lot. And the point is this, if you want to be married, you've got to be committed to being in a perpetual cross-cultural experience. Okay? And the thing is that that's what you have to be committed to in racial reconciliation. Both ways. And not saying, okay, because I really don't want to deal with the cross-cultural thing right now, so I'm going to go pretend that the cross-cultural thing doesn't exist. Which is something you can afford to do if you're in a position of power. It's not what you can do if you haven't been the one who's been in a position of power, culturally, socially. The war wasn't made for you, right? Then it's not a luxury you have. Other people, they default to that luxury. That's what happens. I mean, don't feel bad if you've done that. It just is what it is, right? The point is, say, okay, so you've done it. Just say, you know what? Yes, I've done it because it's hard. Admit it's hard. Okay? This isn't a sitcom. All right? This isn't 22 minutes commercials, we're out. Okay? This is tough. Right? And the thing is, Christians ought to be the best at it. But they're not, generally. A lot of times it's very hard for people to admit that there are things that they have to recognize. And sometimes, let's take a phrase that some people don't like, but I'm going to say anyway. White privilege. How about that phrase? In fact, someone wrote about white privilege on this campus once recently. Right? I remember reading about that. And I understand what that person was trying to say, except that person doesn't recognize that white privilege isn't about whether you're wealthy, blue collar, or whatever. Right? It's about lots of things that exist in the world that just make it easier for you to kind of slide by, even if you're poor, than if you're darker and poor. You know, that's the way it is. Okay? I mean, the point isn't, it's not used as a club, right? But here's the thing about white privilege. It's like getting people to understand that and really admit it. You need to have like a deck of 52 cards. Or maybe more than 52 cards. Because you keep dealing cards that try to explain to people what it is. They go, no, 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 I don't know what you're talking about. No, no. And then 52. Oh!
Yes.
I didn't know that. Right? I mean, that's just the way it is. Because it takes different things for us to get it. With various things. This is the way I understand it works out. There's no one size fits all thing. So it's a long, hard, difficult thing. But it's nothing anybody should check out. And you've got to be willing to say, you know, this is hard, uncomfortable, but you know what I'm not doing? I'm not leaving because it's uncomfortable. And of course, you know, a lot of people do.
We have a question that came in that's actually pretty related to this. What does it look like for us, students, and the majority who may not experience the oppression of being marginalized, to carry each other?
Make sure you're actually willing to be friends with people. Yes. In other words, if you're really a friend, you actually really do things like ask questions. How are you doing? But then when somebody tells you something, you don't go, nah. Yeah, but that's not real. That's not real. Okay, no. What you do is say, really? And if you don't get it, then you say, please help me to get it, because I don't get it. That's what a friend does. Rather than saying, I'll tell you what reality is. Because this is what people do sometimes. I'll tell you when you really ought to feel bad. Oh, that's why you ought to feel bad. That's a very powerful thing for someone to do. Right? A friend is going to say, help me so I can grow in empathy about this. Because I'm lacking in empathy about this. I don't know how to have empathy about this. I need you to help me have empathy about this. It's okay. It's okay to do that. But you have to be willing to ask. And you may have to ask a lot. Because sometimes also happens in a relationship, you have to recognize that sometimes trust is something that is earned over time. And people aren't going to tell you up front everything that they're feeling. Some people are. Some people, they're like, you know, like poker face. How you doing? Good. Good. that's all you're going to get. But the longer that you're there, and they recognize that you actually, still hanging around. Maybe I can drop the veil a little. Right? Takes time. So you've got to be committed to friendship.
Zadie.
I'd like to go back to what you were talking about, engaging culture and activism. In my experience here, I've seen a lot of dedicated people with really beautiful hearts drained by the rigor and difficulty of engaging in a culture that is really slow to change. And knowing that God is deeply concerned about our welfare as individuals, how should we as Christians, concerned Christians, strike a balance in our own personal welfare and also engage in culture? And how should we as the body of Christ gather around and support those people in those times?
I'm just not sure. I'm going to try to repeat the question for the camera. So I'm going to try to do the Reader's Digest. Does it mean anything to you guys? Reader's Digest? There was a couple. Okay. There was like 2 people. Okay, that's good. That's good. I'm learning that I have to change my cultural references, right? Or expand them. So the question was, what about caring for yourself, as well as caring about these problems in the world, right? And how does the body of Christ help with that, right? Well, I think at one level, that's the purpose of gatherings like this, right? Is that this is an environment to come and just, rest a little. Be with God's people and just, worship God together, spend time together, enjoy each other's company. That's all you need to do. You don't have to be talking about the latest challenge to change, right? Doesn't mean you never talk about them, but the point is that something, just do that, right? But I think it's also important, I would say particularly environments like this and Wheaton, where everybody works really hard, to make sure, just as a general self-care type thing, that you recognize that it's important to actually care for yourself and to rest and to to have the kind of faith that says, I really can trust God when He says that there's a thing called a Sabbath. That didn't dawn on me until maybe 42, right? I was reading. It occurred to me that for me to one day a week, whatever have a personal Sabbath, whatever that is, that is one of the fundamental ways of showing that I trust God. Rather than believing that God, I know that there's all these things you want me to do, and I want to serve you, and I want to honor you, and I want to use my gifts, so I will burn myself out for the kingdom. Right? That's not what we need to do. God can handle it. God can handle it. So it's important for us to recognize that Jesus said the Sabbath is made for us. So I think having, finding some way to observe Sabbath is important. And I think also just recognizing that when it comes to great problems, and that if you're involved in it, yes, the world will break your heart. Okay, if it hasn't broken your heart yet, just wait. It is going to happen. All right? Because that's just the way life is. I'll use an example. We just had a 42-year-old professor who died of cancer on campus. Okay? I thought he had another year left. He died Monday. Okay? Nobody expects that. We can have these narratives about the way things are supposed to be or how we want things to turn out. And then what we discover is that, we find we we've been inhabiting mythologies that somehow exclude the reality that we live in a post-Genesis 3 world where disappointment and pain and hurt and sorrow and struggle are typical. And it's manifested in all kinds of ways. And if we don't recognize that when we're engaging things, then I think we can sometimes have a frustration that's a failure to recognize that, oh wait, I really shouldn't be all that surprised that this is the way things are. As much as I want things to be better, I shouldn't be surprised sometimes when things are bad. Right? Because they are sometimes really bad. So I think recognizing that, at one level, man, it can make it easier for us to attend to the reality that there are hard, difficult things to deal with, but that's typical and not exceptional, right? So recognizing that, I think that can help us a little bit, right? In terms of the church, I think it's important for our churches just to talk about the fact that there are lots of different ways that we deal with life in this world. And that we acknowledge the various ways that people are affected by that. Some people, that means being a church where you actually recognize that some people, they have depression. You know? Or some people, some certain events happen and, you know, it's like they're having a PTSD experience. But that the church comes, recognizes those things, but also walks along with people through those things. So the church actually being a community. You know, a community of care, support, love, etc. So. He had his hand up like.
No, you go, Mike.
You had your hand up like 5 times.
It's been answered, basically.
Okay, all right.
My question is, with Black Lives Matter sort of being founded around rejection of respectability, there's like a huge ideology even in the Christian community to not tell the oppressed how to deal with their oppression. And yet, of course, the scriptures give us so many ways of telling the oppressed how to deal with their oppression. So could you just comment on how we sort of minister to those people and what attitudes we should have?
In terms of dealing with the fact that people have been victimized or,
Right, and like how they, like, so some people are reacting not in a Christ-centered way to their oppression. And a lot of people are saying we ought not tell those people how to deal with their oppression. So could you sort of comment on that?
Well, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that there's no one-size-fits-all way to deal with this, right? I think the first thing, though, there has to be a commitment to actually saying, I will recognize that there's something to talk about. But then also recognize that when I talk about it, I have to talk about it in a way where I'm, I may need to ask more questions before I talk about any kind of solutions. Because I need to be sure that I know what I'm talking about. Because I think one of the most difficult things we do with various forms of oppression is to assume that they're all versions of the same thing, when they're not. I mean, everybody's experience isn't the same. And it's a weird thing that happens because, there's very real, brutal things that have happened in this country around race. And, but they're not all the same thing or experienced the same way, right? And they don't all happen for the same reasons. So, I think we have to have the patience to deal with the diversity of the oppression. Because if we don't, we wind up basically, unwittingly, entering into another kind of oppression, right? Where, of course, it must all be this particular kind of thing. Well, then you're just kind of swinging the pendulum to the other side and just making another image. So I don't want to do that either. Now, give me an example of someone saying we shouldn't tell people how to deal with their depression? Is that telling people to pull up by their bootstraps? Is that saying that there's no such thing as victimization, or what?
So sort of telling somebody that, like reminding somebody about forgiveness in the midst of their pain.
I think as Christians, if you're a Christian, then you don't check out of being a Christian because you're a victim, right? Whether you're a victim or oppressor, you still have you belong to God, and God wants us to operate particular ways. I do think that when you talk about the question of forgiveness, it's important that forgiveness is not articulated as if people's pain isn't real. There's like some debates, but some people didn't like the fact that when you had a shooting in Charleston, that some people forgave Dylan Roof that quickly, because they thought that was kind of glossing over all the pain. Now, I don't know that that's necessarily the case, but I think the reason that people were concerned about that is that they're concerned, wow, if they forgive, wow, look at what they do. And it's as if they're not actually dealing with the horror. To me, I'm not going to, I don't know those people, so I can't say how they're dealing with it. But I would imagine, just given the way that grief works, that forgiveness does not mean that there isn't all kinds of emotional pain and difficulty dealing with the loss and the horror that happened there. So we have to attend to the complexity of all that.
No questions from over here.
Maybe the next
This is like a teacher in me, right? It's like, okay, I'm like, see, oh wait, there's a question, thank you.
I was just wondering, how do you reconcile sometimes the secularity of social work, the desire to be a participant in activism?
Great, so when you say secular activism, right, you mean what? Oh, okay. Well, that's a really good question. To me, that's a species of the same thing about thinking about public policy, right? Do I care about various things that people want to put in place for addressing various things in society, with public schools, whether it's stop and frisk, whatever, right? I think there are, well, let's put it this way, I think it's an opportunity to discern how do you understand your co-belligerency around an issue. So you may have a concern about the same cause as, say, a secular activist, but your reasons for being involved might not be the same, right? And you might not even use the same language. But there may be things that you have in common in terms of what you're trying to identify and the change you're trying to enact. So I would say go through a discernment process about that participation rather than just saying don't do it. Because the many justice issues are things that a lot of people who aren't Christians may identify, and we may say, oh, I agree with what you just identified. I'm not going to say that because they're not Christian that I'm not going to care about the issue, right? I may have to think about, at certain levels, whether I get on board with their approach or their strategies, but that conversation needs to happen. Does that give you a question? Okay.
So I have a question.
Oh, okay. Oh, one of those ones? Yes.
So what would you say to a white person who is worried that they will offend a black person by asking race-related questions, even if they were trying to be for them?
Thank you for asking that question. I would say, be brave. Risk misunderstanding. That's walking in the discomfort. Because here's the thing, okay, so you don't ask, right? Then you're committing to remain whatever your misunderstanding is. And it's true. There are probably some people, if you raise those questions, you might go, whoa, that was the blowback I was afraid of. Now other people say, oh, it was surprisingly mild. You don't know, right? But ask the question in a way where you're really, that certainly demonstrates you're really interested in learning, and not that you're using it as an excuse to insert your own opinions about the issue. I mean, come with a posture of a questioner, a genuine questioner, and take a risk, because you got it. Otherwise, maintain the conspiracy of silence.
This question's been here for a while. So,
Okay.
this is a bit off base. How should we engage controversial political issues like gay marriage that are about civic issues of right and equality?
Well, how do we engage it? Well, the question now is how do you engage it post-Obergefell, right? Is I think part of how you do that. I think first make sure you understand the laws themselves, right? But also, I would say going back to what I said earlier, I'm not in favor of same-sex marriage. There's the camera, okay? I mean, that doesn't mean that my disagreement doesn't then give me reason to mistreat people, right? So part of what we have to ask, and part of the complexity with, I think, the gay marriage issue is that there are so many things associated with marriage, so many other laws, right? And that, before in some places you had civil unions or you have gay marriage, and you have people likely ostracized from their families with their partners. They get ill. Partner has no say in anything because of the way the laws are, right? So the family, who hasn't been around, are the ones that are making decisions. Well, that's a problematic circumstance, right? So I mean, do you want justice for a person in that type of situation where that relationship, whatever you think about it, I mean, you know this is probably the first time you're making medical decisions, except for the knows it, but they can't do it. They might even be able to visit. I mean, that's not the case now, obviously, with the laws. But, I think we have to recognize that piece of it. Right now, we also need to think about being in a society where we think about what are the ways in a society that talks about rights, what are the ways that we make sure that as we pursue our desire to have rights about religious freedom, freedom of association, these types of things, that we show that we're actually really interested in those rights for all human beings in the United States, and not just our group of people. And I think, there are some people who are strategizing about approaches to policy that way. That's still a work in progress, because the cultural ferment is that you're either on the side of same-sex marriage or you're, a certain kind of cultural war where you're shaking their fists saying you will not, whatever. And you're not thinking actually about, okay, if you're in a society that talks about rights, then how do we take being in that kind of rights society seriously? Another dimension of that I think is important is this. Whatever you think about same-sex marriage and how that came about, okay, a much bigger problem is heterosexual marriage. Okay? And what I mean is this, is that the reason that we wind up with the kind of language that there is around marriage is because marriage is primarily identified as romantic attachment. And so you basically make a contract around romantic attachment. And here's the thing, okay? Many Christians just put a spiritual veneer on the romantic attachment. But they have the same assumptions about what marriage is. It's basically about my spiritualized romance, and I'll put a contract on it when I get married. Right? In a society where that's all that a marriage is, why would you be surprised that you get same-sex marriage? Because it's just about romantic attachments that are contractual, right? And so here's the thing, though, about that romantic attachment idea. In our culture, marriage has primarily become one of these settings where marriage is about another person is responsible for my personal fulfillment, right? Or they serve my personal desires. And to the extent that you serve my personal desires, our marriage is great. But when you don't, I can get rid of you and trade you for another one. And the thing is that that's part of the cultural ethos. And that's part of the cultural ethos of heterosexual marriage. And same-sex marriage is a species of it, right? I mean, so much of the language is about my feelings, what I want, etc. And if marriage is just about your feelings and what you want, it's basically about two people who are committed to consuming each other, right? As long as I can consume you and use you for my satisfaction, everything's great. And when I don't like your flavor anymore, I can get something new, right? And here's the numbers about the LGBT community. Okay, these are Williams Institute numbers. The Williams Institute at UCLA is a gay advocacy think tank, right? The numbers have not changed since the University of Chicago did a study about sexuality about 20 years ago. 3.5%. That's what the numbers are. Now, the other 96%, right? Okay, there's a lot of problems. And with just heterosexual marriages staying together. And there needs to be more energy, I would argue, towards addressing that in the church than being worried about same-sex marriage. I'm not saying don't attend to it, but you need to be thinking about what's happening over here. Because there's a lot of relational carnage out there. That's a great one.
That's about all the time that we have for questions.
Oh, there was like one person back. Can I answer?
I mean, go.
Okay.
You get the last question! Or the last question up here, anyway. So.
Oh, this is so intense now. Okay, well, basically, like, at home, mainly at home, I've talked to a lot of Christians who have trouble, first of all, like, supporting Black Lives Matter because of, like, violence and whatnot. And also, like, having trouble reconciling their, like, political preferences as, like, conservative with also supporting, like, the social activism movement like Black Lives Matter. So just, like, how can I explain to them better, or how can they understand better, like, how to reconcile their political preferences with their, like, Christian obligations?
Sure. Well, first, recognize that any political grouping, it's only a matter of time before somebody disappoints you in that. Okay, so you have to dial down the sort of eschatological expectation that you put on any political movement, right? Because nobody's going to bring the kingdom. So saying, okay, let's temper the expectations, because sometimes people think, if we just got all our people in here, the kingdom would come. It would not. So recognizing that piece. But then I would say, in terms of, if a person is very socially and theologically conservative, and they're concerned about dimensions of the activism of hashtag Black Lives Matter, and I can understand why there are things that we can be concerned about. I would say before you're dismissive, ask the question, well, what are the things I can affirm? Are there things that they are saying and doing where even if I might agree with how their public performance, let's say. I might say, well, yeah, but there are these things that they are saying that it helps me to think about these issues with a little more complexity, or a little bit differently. And maybe that's an angle on it that I need to think about. It doesn't, I mean, it's not as if that the only options we ever have are you completely sign on or you don't sign on. Okay, that kind of zero-sum thinking isn't going to help anybody. Now, we do happen to live in a world right now where there's such an ideological space, right? Where you're either in one echo chamber or another, with people where you all talk the same, right? Well, get out of the echo chamber and recognize you're in a world with all kinds of people. And you have to deal with that complexity and difficulty. And when you recognize that complexity and difficulty, say, okay, I've got these theological commitments. I have these hopes for society. How, in this case, does hashtag Black Lives Matter resonate with some of those concerns? And how, at the very least, can I be truthful about some of the things? Like what I was saying about the rejection of either legitimacy, etc. Well, it's because of a certain way of thinking about what legitimacy means. I think that's worth thinking about. You know? Does it mean you need to have the same sort of performative activism? Not necessarily. But maybe there are some things you can learn. I think you know, one of the difficulties with so much of our society is, in fact, I was talking to a journalist who works with CNN recently. So many people react to things without knowing the full thing that they're reacting to. It's like they react to tweets. Rather than, it's like you realize that there's like a lot of information here. There's a lot here. So do you know this? Make sure you know this, not just what you saw in the news. What you saw in the news is like 60 seconds. How can you talk about the entirety of what anybody is doing in 60 seconds? Right? I mean, would you like it if I tried to understand you in 60 seconds? I'll bet you wouldn't. Right? But we shouldn't do the same, you know, with these kinds of things. We need to have a learner's discerning disposition, where we can say, yes, 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 no, 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 maybe, maybe, maybe. Be willing to do that. It's hard to do in our culture, but I think it's important.
That's about it. Join me in